Coming to you live from my log cabin on the banks of the Anchor River in North Dakota's farthest west highway point. This is Pike, and I'm going to do some more reading for us tonight like I usually do. Tonight's reading is from the Old Believers on Substack, and it's called The Teaching on Execution. I'll wait just a moment before I start my reading for a couple of people to join. It's a moderately cold day today, so I didn't do a whole lot. I got up, of course, and did some shopping this morning. I like to hit the thrift store, and then I went to the Zen Den Cafe in Homer and got some chaga chai tea. They make awesome chai tea, and they get chaga from me. So it was nice having something wonderful made from something I harvested out in the woods. Highly recommend them. They're awesome people. The Old Believers, The Teaching on Execution. I think this was a fitting read today. We're seeing so much violence in our country, and I can't help to say, but I see a lot of useful idiots that are working for corrupt, evil people that are trying to perpetuate the plantation model and exploit foreigners to use them in our country to maximize their profits. I see a lot of useful idiots being led to believe that allowing illegal aliens in our country is somehow good for them or us, and it's neither. When we allow corrupt people to hire and to have illegal aliens in our country to maximize their profits, it destroys our country, and it destroys the country of the people that came here for a better life. By allowing them to take the path of least resistance, nothing good ever happens in their country and nothing ever changes. It'd be interesting to see if I organized a flight and weapons to fly to these foreign countries that are being run by immoral, illegal, and violent leaders. If I was to organize a flight and full weaponry so that we could go down there and take care of business and make a better country for those people so that they wouldn't have to flee their homes, how many would be willing to get on that plane? How many would be willing to put themselves at risk and go fight for their persecuted brothers and sisters in their respective homelands? I think we all know the answer to that. And not wanting them to be here isn't hateful. I want them to be able to live in their own countries in peace and safety. We should volunteer to go help as much as we can and not bring people, let's say from Somalia, and dump them in the middle of a completely different country, a completely different culture, and expect that that was somehow a good deed. I think it's easy to see when you see who's behind a lot of this stuff. Alex and George Soros. A lot of political leaders on both sides have exploited illegal aliens throughout decades of history in our country. And it's basically the plantation model of slavery. It's the same, it was the same then as it is now. It was the same even from the days of Egypt, when the Israelites were forced to make bricks for the Pharaoh to build his cities, to provide them with slave labor. It's the same thing. We see the elite of a country trying to use people any way that they can to ingratiate themselves. And it's sad, and it has to be fought against. I see all over Facebook and social media all these new political action sites that are curiously popping up all of a sudden ever since the fraud was uncovered in Minnesota. And now they're trying to throw as much mud in the air as they can to keep our eyes off the real crimes that were happening. See Governor Walz inciting protesters. And I'm not on any political party. I'm not on any side. I believe in the Constitution, though, and I believe that we need to have our rights. And you can't force free Americans to fund things against their will. We don't have leaders, we don't have kings in America. No matter what any political party tries to say, we never have. We have representatives that represent and protect our constitutional rights, that protect our country. We don't allow them to rule us or to subjugate us or to force us to do anything. And all these useful fools that we see in the streets, what do they really want? They aren't fighting for either the illegal aliens or for our country. They've been deluded, they've fallen into delusion, and they've become useful tools of very evil and sick men. We're starting to see the fruits of our labors. The tree of our American society's roots have crept into filthiness and immoral things. And it's transferring up all that filth, all that abortion, all that murder, all that drugs, all that delusion, all the sexual immorality is traveling up the roots of the American tree. And it's manifesting itself in the cancerous fruits that are being born on its branches. And soon that contaminated wood is going to start rotting, and we're going to see the collapse of our society. We don't want to see anyone die. What we should be fighting for is for those countries where these people feel like they have to flee from, can be set free from the tyranny that they've been put under by their immoral and evil rulers. We send one team of Delta Force to Venezuela, and look how quickly that their evil government collapsed. We made a fool of their leader, made him put stupid goggles on his face, and flew him back with Delta Force, who took lots of photo opportunities to mock the little demon that they captured down in the jungle. And that's really how easy it is. We have one of the most technologically advanced fighting forces, or actually we have the most technologically advanced fighting force in the world, period. And it would be so easy for them to go country to country and liberate all these people, including Iran and including China, where China is burning Christians alive. And we should. And it should be a volunteer force. I already know how many of our soldiers would be ready to jump up and say, yes, I want to help my brothers and sisters. And even if we had a foreign legion in the United States, which might be something we might want to consider, then they'd be more than happy to go out to all these foreign nations and liberate the suffering humans around the world. So tonight's reading is from the Old Believers on Substack, the teaching on execution. It is rarely spiritually helpful or politically productive to dwell or hold on to the sufferings inflicted on a people in the past, so long as these offenses have ceased. In the case of the Old Believers, tortures, imprisonments, and executions have long since ceased, and the atrocities that were committed can no more be held against the contemporary Orthodox than the most severe reaction to them. the rare cases of self-immolation can be held against the old believers. It is helpful, though, to reflect upon the past and to understand its meaning, its context. In this sense, the persecutions are a very important part of the old believer's story, essential even. For some, the teachings and actions of the state church in this matter were seeing themselves as sufficient grounds for separating from it. Bishop Mikhail Semyonov, in his apology for leaving the synodal church of the old believers, writes, "The old rite, these are the holy steps by which millions ascended to God. These are the sacred relics of a holy past, as dear and as the little grave of a mother and father. And so, if people who cling to these holy relics are brutally persecuted and their sanctities are deliberately, spitefully thrown into the mud, can there be any doubt that these oppressors are not Christians? I mean, the oaths against the rite, the mockery of the old rite, the unwillingness to understand how precious these relics ought to be to everyone. Even if there were no errors at all in the church and only this mercilessness existed, I would say, one must leave such a church. And a church that chops up cemetery crosses for firewood on the grave of my own mother. There is no God, no Christ. And in addition, there is outright cruelty, violence towards those who adhere to the old rite. These old believers, frozen like ice statues in episcopal courtyards, burned in log houses, deprived of their tongues. Are these not acts of violence themselves a heresy, acts that found such a terrible expression in Patriarch Joachim's admission? We, they say, burn those who blaspheme us. Or on the conclusion of the Rock of Faith that it is beneficial for heretics to die, for there is no other cure for them greater than death. It may be that this heresy again has no name, but that does not prevent it from being a heresy, a distortion of the Holy Gospel, the very kind for which St. Martin of Tours once broke communion with Bishop Ithacasius and his supporters. But enough for now. I assert that all Christians who value their soul and its salvation were obliged to separate from Nikon's church for the sake of self-preservation. The justifications for and the use of force against heretics has a long and complicated history that goes well beyond the old believer schism. However, in the history of the church, there are no instances of such a widespread execution of such a teaching as that used against the old believers. It is admitted today that the old believers were not, after all, heretics. Therefore, the proper understanding and context of the synodal support and demands for these actions can perhaps only be answered by the polemicists, but for some things are better left unsaid. Today's post below is a short article from the Russian website Russian Faith from ruvera.ru, and deals with the topic of synodal responsibility for the violence against the old believers. The material published on our website, ruvera.ru, titled Conversation on Persecutions, caused a great renaissance. It described a discussion between old believer apologists and synodal missionaries on the topic, examination of the reproach made by contemporary old believers against the Orthodox Church for the harsh measures applied to their church in former times. Among the questions sent by the readers, one is frequently encountered. It is widely known that there were persecutions of Christian old believers. Today, new ritualists assure us that their church had no involvement in the persecutions and that the persecutions were carried out exclusively by the state. Is this true? Today, we publish a selection of facts and documents on this topic. Indeed, in recent years, the opinion has been spreading that the persecutions of old believers were initiated by state structures. The figures of the New Rite Church, the Synodal Church, were supposedly not involved in them. Undoubtedly, some representatives of the Romanov dynasty, such as Tsars Alexei Mikhailovich, Emperors Peter I and Nicholas I, were obsessed with the idea of eradicating the old faith. However, their negative attitude toward the old rite and old belief was shaped directly under the influence of figures from the New Rite Church. Well known, for example, are the close spiritual relations between Peter I and Archbishop Pitriam of Nizhny Novgorod, Potemkin. as well as between Nicholas I and Metropolitan Filaret of Moscow, the Rostov, which significantly influenced the mood of these statesmen. However, beyond this, over the centuries, the New Right Church developed a real ideological system justifying these persecutions. This approach received the character of official church teaching at the Council of 1666 through 1667. And if anyone does not obey even in one thing of what is commanded by us, or begins to contradict, we shall punish such persons spiritually. And if they begin to despise even our spiritual punishment, we shall add bodily afflictions to them. This decision of the council was immediately carried out by the Tsarist authorities. The Golovin redaction of the Siberian Chronicle compilation, compiled on the orders of Governor Golovin in the 1680s, reports on the decree of Alexei Mikhailovich. In the year 184, 1676, on February 19, there came the sovereign's decree to the boyar and voivodes Peter Mikhailovich, Saltykov, and companions concerning church schismatics who are found in schism. And those people are to be questioned and their ashes scattered, so that not even their bones remain. And those who are found to be of young years, those people who are forcibly brought and punished, and if they do not convert, they are likewise to be burned. The necessity of persecutions was also indicated in the Acts of the Council of 1681. Patriarch Joachim and the hierarchs appealed to the authorities. We beseech and pray conciliary to the great Prince Theodore Alexeyevich, autocrat of all great and little, and White Russia. And those corrupters and apostates, after much church teachings and punishment, and after our archpastoral entreaty for their conversion to true repentance, prove obstinate, disobedient to the Holy Church, and that such opponents, the great sovereign Tsar and great Prince Theodore Alexeyevich, autocrat of all great, little, and White Russia, ordered to be sent to the civil court, and, according to his sovereign consideration, to execute judgment on whoever is worthy of what, and concerning now in voivodeships and henceforth to all voivodes and officials, to write this into their instructions, so that this matter may be firmly under his sovereign fear, and to landlords and estate owners and their stewards who have such opponents or will have them, likewise to report in the cities to the hierarchs and voivodes, and where schismatics appear, and upon the hierarchs' dispatches prove strong. Then the voivodes and officials are to send servicemen after those schismatics. This council decreed the burning of the Pustonzersk prisoners, which was soon carried out by the Tsar Theodore Alexeyevich, who issued the corresponding decree. The Tsar heeded the hierarch's request and in 1682 signed a charter on the universal search and trial of schismatics, O believers. In it, the hierarchs of the dominant confession received new powers in the struggle against the old faith, and the Tsar commanded secular authorities to assist the New Right Church in every way in the persecutions. A new decree was developed by Patriarch Joachim and signed by the Tsarist authorities in 1684. It was called on the punishment of those who spread and accept heresies and schisms. People accused of church contradictions were to be tortured. But if from the tortures they begin to stand stubbornly in it and do not bring submission to the Holy Church, then after a threefold questioning at the execution, if they do not submit, burn them. Those less guilty, after being punished with a knout, were to be held with great care in monastic prisons, given only bread and water. An even more large-scale intensification of the persecutions was considered at the Council of 1685 under the presidency of Patriarch Joachim. The council developed an entire code for the persecution of all believers. It was signed by Tsarevna Sophia and contained 12 articles devoted to various executions, tortures, and persecutions. Those schismatics who oppose the Holy Church and lay blasphemy upon it, and do not go to church or to the church singing, or to spiritual fathers for confession, and do not partake of the holy mysteries, and do not admit priests with sanctity and church necessities into their homes, and among Christians with their unseemly words cause scandal and unrest, and stand stubbornly in that thievery, those thieves are to be tortured as to from whom they were taught there. and how long ago, and whom they name. And those named persons are to be taken and questioned and given face to face confrontations among themselves, and from the confrontations tortured. And those who from the torture stand stubbornly in it and do not bring submission to the Holy Church for such heresy, after a threefold questioning at the execution, if they do not submit, are to be burned in a log house and the ashes scattered. Those who decided to baptize according to the old rite with 3 immersions faced serious punishment, and those people who went to schismatics and were rebaptized by them themselves and considered the former holy baptism as improper baptism, those who did not bring submission in this are to be executed by death. For those baptizing according to the old rite, the following punishment was prescribed. Those people went through the villages and baptized people who were of full age, as well as their children who were of full and minor years, and called their former holy baptism improper, having confessed and communed them, execute them by death and without mercy. Patriarch Joachim signed several personal decrees on the persecutions of the ancient Orthodox Christians, and one of them he obligated diocesan hierarchs and other clergy to watch strictly that schismatics do not live in the volosts and in the forest, and where they appear, send them themselves into exile, destroy their refuges, sell their property, and send the money to Moscow. And another, he ordered the seizure from all believers of peasant households, the shops of townspeople, their trades, everything was to be taken, and settlements burned without remainder. According to the testimony of foreigners, only before Easter 1685 in Moscow, by order of Patriarch Joachim, about 90 Christians preaching the old faith were burned in log houses. At the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th century, tortures and executions of all believers on the spot took place with the direct participation of new rite diocesans, bishops, and their officials. Thus, Metropolitan Cornelius of Novgorod sent Protopope Lev Ivanov with Streltsy to the Zaonezhny region to search for schismatics. Armed detachments under the command of priests were sent by Archbishop Athanasius Lyubimov of Kolmogory, Bishop Philotheos Leshinsky, appointed Metropolitan of Siberia in 1702, recommended to Peter I the extermination of church schismatics and the destruction of their homes to the foundations. It's important to note that the executions, torments, and persecutions, beginning with the Council of 1666 and 1667, received an important eschatological canonical evaluation. In the time of Patriarch Nikon, repressions against religious dissenters had a precedent character and were connected with the personal malice of the persecutors. However, after the Great Moscow Robber Council, they acquired the form of a completed and integral church teaching. Conciliary, affirmed and explained in a number of symbolic, catechetical, and theological texts. A broad substantiation of the teaching on the execution of the disobedient was developed in patriarchal and synodal literature at the beginning of the 18th century. In 1700, on the initiative of Patriarch Adrian, the church document was compiled, articles on the episcopal courts. In it, the teaching on the execution of the disobedient, the persecution of dissenters was defended, and the right of church organs to participate in investigative and repressive processes was specified. In particular, in those years, the investigation of church rebels was conducted by the patriarchal chancellery and diocesan church courts, which, after issuing a spiritual sentence, sent the condemned for punishment to Streltsy and other chancelleries for civil punishment. A little later, the synod published the book, The Spiritual Sling, Prashchitcha Dukovnaya, which provided an extensive theological justification for the teaching on the execution of the disobedient. In several chapters of the book, numerous examples of the killing of sinners and apostates recorded on the pages of the Old Testament were cited. On this basis, the conclusion was drawn, and according to the sacred scripture, just as in the Old Testament church, it was commanded to kill the disobedient, and they were killed. How much more so in the new grace, those who do not submit to the Holy Eastern and Great Russian Church ought to be subjected to punishment, for it is fitting and righteous. For there was the shadow, here's the grace. There were images, here's the truth, there was the Lamb, here is Christ. O believers were called criminals worthy of the harshest punishment. Schismatics are not sons of the church, but true disobedient ones, therefore worthy to be handed over to the punishment of the civil court, worthy of every punishment and wounds, and if not healed, then of deadly killing. In the book, The Rock of Faith, prepared under the personal guidance of the locum tenens of the patriarchal throne, it is stated, if it is righteous to kill murderers, evildoers, sorcerers, then all the more so heretics, who kill the soul more than robbers and create nationwide unrest in the kingdom. Addressing Christians who preserve church piety, church hierarchs directly indicated the church will cleanse its weapon, bend its bow, and arouse the hearts of rulers to vengeance against schism. And then you will receive worthy vengeance with a fierce end. Guided by this teaching, new right hierarchs for hundreds of years aroused the hearts of rulers to murders, robberies, imprisonments, and exiles of Russian believing people. An important place is occupied on the teaching. An important place is occupied by the teaching on the execution of the disobedient. In the conciliary, affirmed document of the New Right Church, the spiritual regulation. Here, for the first time, articles appear indicating the necessity of depriving civil rights for all persons adhering to the old faith. Throughout all Russia, no one form from the schismatics is to be elevated to authority, not only spiritual but also civil, even to the lowest beginning in administration, so as not to arm against ourselves fierce enemies who constantly think evil against the state and the sovereign. In the 1720s, the Synod established a system of inquisitorial instructions. The first proto-inquisitor was appointed as the hegumen of the Moscow Danilov Monastery, Pafnuty, on the basis of the report points of the Synod approved in 1722. The secret chancery was obliged to assist the Synod in its struggle against all believers. At the insistence of new right hierarchs, cases related to the confession of the old faith were classified as so-called malicious or especially dangerous ones. Since, as stated in the decree, the schismatic delusion full of stubbornness is contrary to orthodoxy and malicious. In 1721, the Synod issued another work devoted to justifying the teaching on the execution of the disobedient. The points for the edification of schismatics were compiled by Archimandrite Theophylact Lopatinsky of the Zaikonospasky Monastery, future Archbishop of Tver, and Archimandrite Anthony of the Zlatoust Monastery. In these points, the authors theologized on the sanctity of the teaching on torments, referring to the authority of the Rudder, Korpschaya, and patristic writings. The Synod's points demanded strict adherence to the resolution of the Church Council of 1666-1667 and the Eulos Heni of 1649 concerning the punishment of the disobedient. Having already become a hierarch, Theophylact Lopatinsky composed an independent anti-old believer work, Exposure of Schismatic Falsehood, in 1745. It was supplemented by the famous Metropolitan Arseny Matsevich of Rostov, now glorified as a saint by the Russian Orthodox Church. The latter provides in the book a profound justification for the teaching on execution, citing examples from the Old and New Testaments as well as from church history. Arseny proved the church's right to the physical destruction of its enemies. The teaching of Christ, said the bishop, gives sufficient grounds for this. These efforts did not go without effect. According to the Synod data, out of 190,000 registered in the schism from 1716 to 1737, after the application of executions and oppressions, 111,000 were joined to the dominant church, fled, were exiled to hard labor, or died as a result of the persecutions. In the end of the 17th century, authorities mainly exercised spiritual guidance over the persecutions, including search and inquiry. Then, at the beginning of the 18th century, a tendency appeared to concentrate in the hands of church structures the entire sphere of persecutions, from the formation of legislation to the pronouncement of sentences. Professor Zenkovsky notes, the synod tried to completely free itself in its struggle against schism from the control of civil authorities, but Peter I, fearing that the synod would begin to arrest and persecute schismatics too energetically, left general supervision over the arrested to the provincial administration. It would be desirable to conclude the answer to this question with the words of the famous old believer researcher F.E. Melnikov. Above all this darkness rises like the enormous head of a dragon yet another dogma, the most terrible, bloody, and fiery dogma of murders in the true sense of the word, the dogma of execution according to the definition of this very church itself. It is noteworthy that the above quoted resolution of councils, the synod, and quotations from symbolic books have not been canceled or condemned by anyone up to our time. They were also bypassed by the attention of the local council of the Russian Orthodox Church in 1971. So this was a historical reading, and I'm just reading it to understand more the viewpoint. The viewpoint of the old believers. Of course, the church has changed. And now, under ROCOR, and I'll read some more to explain how and why later, but the old rite is allowed to continue its traditions as a part of ROCOR. Our church is old rite. I read from an old rite prayer book. I was baptized into the old rite church. We do the two-fingered sign of the cross, as you've seen before. The Trinity and God lowering himself to man. And sometimes I have people even from Turkey that ask me about that. Why are you doing the sign of the cross like that? But I love the old rite church, and I went to the Antiochian church for quite a while, but I wasn't baptized into it. Our priest ended up leaving the Antiochian Orthodox Church. So I've been a part of the new rite and the old rite. And it's reunified. And I think it's important in Alaska because the Bella Crnitsa was teaching in Slavonic. So I had a chance to actually go to several services, actually quite a few services, when our old rite church was still part of the Bella Crnitsa. And I understand that it's so important for people to be able to learn in the language that they speak. I think it's a beautiful thing that the old rite church is being taught in English now. I think it's so helpful for our country. And the more I learn about it, the more I love it. It's continually growing in my heart. It's just my terrible camera that looks like smoke. Yeah, it's just my terrible, horrible camera. It's just the glow from my light. I have LED light up there. But soon, I think the important takeaway from this article is that you can't change people through hate. It wouldn't matter how many people that church, that misguided church under Nikon, killed. It wouldn't have mattered because they'd never changed their hearts. You can't change people's minds through violence. You can't physically beat a misbehaving dog to do good. You'll only cause fear and mistrust in it. And it will never trust you and it will never love you. And just like we try to force people through violence to fall into our viewpoint, just like the failing protests in Minnesota, where all those poor lost people think that through destroying the town or through violence, they can force people into allowing them to give up their country, to give up their rights, to give up their safety. It's never going to bear fruit for them. They're planting the tares of evil. They've allowed Satan to come into their minds and their hearts. And what they're doing is evil. It's so easy to fall into delusion. We have to guard our hearts. And these people that are protesting in the streets that hate, if they just pray for the president, pray for our country, pray for those people, pray for their leaders and these foreign nations that are being persecuted, if they prayed for even those evil men, God could change the hearts of those evil men and make those countries places where those people could have prosperity and safety. You can't drive out hate with hate. Only love can do that. And we have to be not afraid to stand up against all this evil that's going on in our world, to tell people that it's wrong. Do you know how many times it says, do not be afraid in the Bible? Could anyone guess? Isn't it ironic that do not be afraid appears in the Bible 365 times? What would you think would be the reason that it would say that 365 times? We have to, as Christians, not be afraid to speak out and to help and correct our brothers. I think some of us think that it's judgment. Maybe we've been misguided and we think it's judging people and we try to correct our brothers, but that's love. We aren't saying that they're a bad person. We're just saying what they're doing isn't the right way. We need to offer them a better solution and a better way, or try to teach them the better way of doing something. That's love. Correct your brothers and sisters in love. We're all fallen. All of us are fallen. All fall. I struggle every day. The enemy is constantly at war against us. But the funny thing is, we should rejoice that we're being so severely spiritually attacked, because the devil doesn't waste his ammunition on the dead. Remember that. I love you all, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'll be on a little bit later with some more readings for us. Been kind of pondering what to read about next. It was just so sad to see how much hate and violence is going on in this country right now, and how many people are being led to their own destruction by evil men. Pray for Tim Walz that he finds God, and pray that he's taken out of that position of authority, because he's proven he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Pray that he's delivered from the enemy. I love you all, brothers and sisters. I'll see you all in the next one. God bless. Look at the comments quick. Thank you all for your comments. I'm just looking through, trying to go back to the beginning. Thank you all, my brothers and sisters, for joining me and listening. Everybody's welcome here. I try to help us learn about God so it doesn't matter. Jesus didn't come to save the perfect. He came to save the sinner. And I wasn't always a Christian, and I was a very bad person a lot of my life. I'm a wretched and unworthy sinner, and it's only by God's mercy and His grace that I received through His love that surpasses all my understanding. Thankful that God, when I ran away from Him, when I turned my back on Him, He didn't run from me, but He followed me and kept silent and allowed me to choose to learn my own lessons the hard way. And when I turned finally in my brokenness and asked Him to help me, as soon as I turned around, He was already there, ready to embrace me in His arms and to help me back up. And He's exactly the same for you, for all of you. No matter if you're a Satanist, if you're a Muslim, no matter what you believe, our Lord is right behind you, waiting for you to turn to Him and to love Him. There was a good thing I found about Islam the other day, talking about why Allah is never pictured as a father figure in Islam. Maybe I'll try to post that. I'll try to post that in the comments after I end the stream so that you can listen to it, because I thought it was a really great explanation. I love you all, brothers and sisters, and I'll see you on the next one. God bless.